Hello, I'm Phoebe Boucher, Managing Editor of Raven Chronicles Press. Thank you for joining us for Raven Talk, Raven's online podcast. We are hosting monthly conversations with writers, artists, and cultural warriors. Today, Ruby Takushi, the Director of Programs for Recovery Café, is talking to writer and editor Anna Bálint about the launch of the second edition of the anthology Words From the Café. In 2016, Raven Chronicles published our first book after publishing Raven Chronicles magazine for 25 years. That book was Words from the Café, an anthology of writing by people in recovery. Anna, who founded Safe Place Writing Circle at Seattle's Recovery Café, edited and organized the structure of the book, and her husband, Willie J. Pugh, took the incredible photos that captured the spirit and humanity of the 10 featured writers in the book. Also included are other voices, and there were 12 other writers from the writing circle. Now, 6 years later, as of April 10th, 2022, we are publishing a second edition of Words from the Café with a new introduction by Anna. This important book has been praised by many writers and readers. Poet Jim Bodine said, "Words from the Café is a recovery program knocking on the door of mainstream American culture." Ex-Washington State Poet Laureate Todd Marshall said, "What's so astonishing about this collection is the range of emotions and the quality of the writing." Poet and psychiatrist Jed Myers said, "I'm learning through Words from the Café that what it brings forth such insightful, forgiving, and hopeful formations of serious life struggle is an essential space, safe space, a space like the Recovery Café's Safe Place Writing Circle." Dr. Ruby Takushi is the Director of Programming for the Recovery Café and co-founded Recovery Café with Killian No. Prior to arriving in Seattle, she lived in Washington, D.C. and completed postdoctoral training at St. Elizabeth's Hospital with a specialization in group psychotherapy. She served on the faculty of Howard University from 1992 to 1996, during which time she also worked as a staff psychologist at the D.C. General Hospital Methadone Clinic for Women. From 1996 to 1999, she conducted research in gambling behavior at the University of Washington Addictive Behaviors Research Center. She maintains a private practice in Seattle and is deeply committed to supporting the growth of accessible, high-quality, long-term recovery support in the community. Anna Bálint is a London-born, Seattle-based poet, writer, editor, and cultural activist of East European descent. Her many years of editorial work for Raven Chronicles includes Take a Stand, Art Against Hate Anthology, co-edited by Anna, Phoebe Boucher, and Thomas Hubbard, which was winner of the 2021 Washington State Book Award for Poetry, and Words from the Café, an anthology of writing by people in recovery. Her short fiction collection, Horse Thief, Curbstone Press, 2004, spans cultures and continents and was a finalist for the Pacific Northwest Book Award. She's an alumna of Hedgebrook's Writers in Residence program and the Jack Straw Writers program. Anna has also taught creative writing for many years and in many places, including Washington State Prisons, El Centro de la Raza, Writers in the Schools, Antioch University, Richard Hugo House, and Path with Art, which are all in Seattle. In 2001, she received the Leading Voice Award in recognition of her creative work with urban and immigrant youth at El Centro de la Raza. Anna currently teaches adults in recovery from trauma, addiction, mental illness, and homelessness at Seattle's Recovery Café, where she founded the Safe Place Writing Circle. Turning it over to Ruby.
Thank you, Phoebe. What a nice introduction. So glad to be here with you, Anna. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too, Ruby.
I'm looking forward to our conversation and this second edition, this new release of this writing. And I wonder if it would be one good way to start is to ask you to read a paragraph out of your introduction to set the context and give give our listeners a sense of what you hope to create. How does that sound? I'm looking at page 18. Would you read that paragraph?
Which paragraph on page 18?
The second paragraph,
Oh,
page 18.
okay, I got it.
Okay,
Yeah, I'd love to read that.
please.
When someone writes stories that grow out of their life experience, they rediscover something about themselves in the process. It's a way of reclaiming their life, and that can be very healing. A few minutes before, there was a blank sheet of paper. Now there's this. Often what emerges are memories, stories, moments of life that have been buried and forgotten for years. Writing in this way can help make sense of the past while also reaching toward a different future. Reconnecting with lost or forgotten moments of joy can help free someone from a tangle of past hurts. This isn't something that's planned or stated as a goal. It just happens.
Oh, I love that. It just happens. On the one hand, so true, and yet a lot of vision and preparation and making space had to happen first. But your words just resonates with each of the poems. It makes me have to start by asking, how did you create such a writing circle? What were you envisioning?
Well, I knew already from past teaching that there were many people out there who, and I had encountered people who were seeking to write. But for those people, the question of emotional safety in the space that they came to write in was often such that they found it daunting or intimidating. So they either didn't go, or when they got there, holding back, not really feeling comfortable sharing themselves because it felt risky. So for example, teaching at Hugo House for 10 years, I had a student there who was struggling with a severe mental illness that had really kind of shaped her whole life as an adult and caused her enormous grief. And she wanted to write about it. She, that was kind of what she had come to the class to seek, to learn more about writing so she could do that. Yet at the same time, feeling safe sharing it with anyone, fearing judgment, etc., was sort of a real, she was walking a fine line all the time. And so it became a thing. I became more and more aware of that with her. Like she would ask, she didn't feel comfortable sharing to the class, but could she give it to me and share with me? And it went like that for a long time. So that's one person, but I found variations of that everywhere I went, and so it was an accumulation of kind of like, in all these different experiences I've been in, working with small children all the way, to the women in the prison, etc. And it would like, oh, here it is again, that same thing. It would sort of like become so obvious to me what this person needs to be able to really delve in and explore the craft of writing and explore themselves, was to feel safe doing so.
And Anna, you have created that safe space in many different contexts, in classrooms, as you mentioned, again, in prisons. What about the Recovery Café community made you think, in this place also, I might create a circle where people like your student that you just described might feel safe? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's kind of funny you asked that, really, because at the time that I first came to the cafe in 2012, early 2012, by that time, I really was starting to seek, where can I experiment, try setting up this group that I envisioned, that I already sort of wanted to call Safe Place because that's what it was. But, you know, I'd had a couple of experiments trying to do things in the community with a rental, but it was really tricky because it couldn't be regular. People didn't have money. I couldn't necessarily pay for everything. It was very tricky. So when I come to the cafe, I was introduced by a friend who brought me for lunch saying, you know, I think you'd really like this place. And she was a longtime student of mine herself. And I get there and I think, gee, yeah, I sure would like to teach here, you know, because the atmosphere, as soon as you walk in the cafe, that everybody feels that sense of welcome. And then you look around and, you know, she brought me for lunch. And of course, at lunchtime, there's a lot of people there and it's kind of noisy and lively. And I looked around and, you know, you could see, just looking around the place, this is a place of comfort for these people. This is a place of community for these people. There were people laughing, sharing, you know, someone over here was playing cards, you know, and so by the time I left, I was set up to teach a class with the School of Recovery, you know, and which I was excited about. And once that class started, ironically, it just kind of evolved into Safe Place because the students were adamant that they had to keep going. They didn't want to quit. And if that was another thing about my idea of what was needed, was that, yeah, there is a real purpose to have a class that has a beginning and an end and a specific focus on a topic, you know, or an aspect of writing, craft or something. But there also needs to be a space that's there when you need it, in an ongoing way, where there's no pressure to finish, no sense of like, suddenly I'm going to be cut loose from this place that I'm comfortable in. And so when the students say, well, can't we just keep going? You know,
Yeah.
I checked in with the School of Recovery and it's like, yes. And so it just literally was organic once I got in that space.
I remember those early days, Anna, and students would ask when the next class was coming. And I have so many questions to ask you, just also the connection to the larger community, but I want to stay focused still on, you walked into the Recovery Café, a place of long-term recovery support for men and women, for adults in recovery. And among that larger lunch crowd, a few trickled into your class. So let's focus there. Say a word about what happens in the classroom for those that choose to stop playing cards and come write.
Well, of course, it wasn't on the same day. So it's like it's arranged. So then I guess people who are really interested, they plan. It's something they want to do. They want to learn something new. And usually when people go to a writing class, they expect it to have a beginning and an end. And my class was set up for that, just like all the others. But, you know, even when I was teaching at Antioch, and so everyone was doing things for credit, and, you know, they had some other purpose, but still I would have these vulnerable folks that would show up in the classes. One time I had a class that was almost entirely comprised of people dealing with trauma or mental illness. It was amazing. And this was at Antioch. And this same need comes up. It's sort of like a natural thing. If the person is feeling good about where they are, it's feeling safe, it's feeling comfortable, then all of a sudden it becomes something more than just, you know, have I got the credit? How much have I learned? Have I passed the class? It's like, I want this environment to continue. And so those people, that first group of people that came in, they obviously didn't know any of that when they came in. And not all of them did continue, you know, but then new people came.
You know, Anna, you know, that language of safe place, it resonates with so many of us, but another layer of it is welcome and all that you've described. but that you let people write and attend on their own schedule. That yes, there's a beginning and an end, but people can be gone for long periods of time and you welcome them back, pick right up where they left off. I think that's something unique about how you've created a writing space.
And it's something that I felt was missing, just in general. And I felt this over the period of many years, that there needs to be something, because we're dealing with people who part of their lives almost across the board is loss and disruption. And it's like having a place that they can count on. It's there. It became just a sort of like a dream of mine, that's something that's needed and it's missing.
A place for people to return to.
Yes. And it's not returning to a different class. And that's good too. Like I worked with Path with Art for a couple of years, and they have a wonderful range of teachers and classes available, and those classes run for a specific period of time. And people get a lot out of them, and people will return to teachers that they feel comfortable with, et cetera, for a new experience. But there isn't that absolute continuity. And I would still run into people saying, oh, I wish we didn't have to stop.
Yeah.
So it's not one or the other, but this piece is generally not available.
Anna, you've called out the experience of trauma a couple of times, and your introduction speaks to healing from trauma. Could you say more about the connection you see between safe space, writing, and healing from trauma?
Well, one thing, because of course I'm learning all the time myself alongside other people. And one thing that becomes apparent is that people who are dealing with problems like addiction or mental illness of one sort or another, trauma is always a piece of their personal history and experience. And whatever else it is, the piece that may get them in trouble, like addiction, is linked in some way or another to trauma. And so that in and of itself was kind of like, it just became, it's just something I was learning, and I sort of, in a sense, already understood, but I learned it on a new level and a deeper level. And so it's like paying attention to trying to give people permission to go to those places, to revisit those places, the most difficult places, if and when they feel ready to do it. There's no, but also, you see, the other part of that, and it's in what I just read, that paragraph, is that I feel it's essential alongside of that we're not just kind of like digging up all the hard times and kind of like processing them to death or something. It's just as important, to reclaim moments of joy. Because nobody would still be alive. They wouldn't be at the cafe. They just would not be in this world in any kind of real sense of the word if their lives were that bleak. They would have given up wanting to live. And so the joy is there, but it can sometimes get hard to see it or remember it and realize that, okay, I had a difficult childhood. I didn't have stability. I was abused as a child or whatever. But at the same time, there is this real joy that resides. In fact, there's a piece in here that's wound up. It got recorded at Jack Straw Productions, who also is where we did the CD for the original book.
Is it a piece you think you might read for?
It's not real long, but it's such a good story because it illustrates this thing about those two sides. And like I say, this is by Angel Ibarra. And that she got this on the podcast. She became Artist of the Week at Jack's Store based on this piece. And she also read this piece when she helped me do a workshop. I've forgotten. It was a King County wellness conference having to do with mental health, etc., a couple of years ago. And she read this. And it just resonates with a lot of people. It's called Beauty Queen. And at the top it says, she was more like a beauty queen from a movie scene from Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. If you wanted to look, it's on page 65.
Okay, thank you.
I was 8 years old when Michael Jackson made yet another mark on the world. He'd already entered into every household with access to MTV, which was fairly new at the time in the early 1980s. In our home, it was a tradition to watch the Thriller video every night at 5 o'clock sharp. And Friday night was music and dancing night with the family. Mom and Dad would play their records or sometimes their 8 tracks. But whenever they popped in Billie Jean, it was time for Mama to put on her black dancing hat, like the one Michael Jackson wore. See, Mama was a performer. She used to dance on Broadway, ballet, tap, and jazz. Mama did it all. On Friday nights, the 3 of us girls would climb up on the couch, our feet dangling, as Dad introduced Mama, and the living room became her stage. Those were the fun times growing up, because in my house, when things were good, they were really good. And when they were bad, they were bad. On this particular night, everything was perfect. Dad was smiling and my sisters were giddy with excitement. I couldn't wait for Mama's performance to start. It was always so much fun to watch her quick moves to the beat with all her twirls mixed up with both ballet and jazz. With her black hat tipped the same way Michael Jackson tipped his, she waited for the record to start. We clapped our hands with anticipation, and then the living room went silent for a moment, with only the crisp static sound of the record player. And then she was dancing and twirling on our hearts. Like the song goes, she was more like a beauty queen from a movie scene. She's the one who dances on the floor, leaving smiles on our faces. Mama was good at dancing and twirling on our hearts. We were never tired of her performance, especially when she did Michael Jackson's famous move, the moonwalk. We were her crowd, screaming and shouting for more. Nothing else mattered on Friday nights. I never wanted them to end. It would take me many years to understand Mama. She had a pain deep within her. A beautiful blonde with so many talents, I would not know the extent of her illness and her afflictions for some time. Eventually, her torment left her walking off the stage, never to return. We prayed for her to come back and perform again for us, but it was too late. There wasn't anything we could do for her. She was never coming back. I grew up, and some years later, my own illness would turn out to be the same as hers. Everything began to make sense. I suddenly had a new perspective of what life was like for Mama. I will never fully understand the desecration she bestowed on me. I only learned that things don't look as they appear. And at the same time, someone who deals with mental illness and addiction is sometimes the most talented, caring, and loving person you can ever come across. A beauty queen from a movie scene is only half of Mama's story.
Oh, Anna, that's beautiful.
Isn't it?
And what strikes me is for the writer also, it's all the pain and the struggle is only half of her own story. So her rediscovery that there was joy and beauty in her childhood, so powerful.
Yeah, can I tell you a little backstory though with that?
Yes, please.
Something happened when she wrote it, which is that up to that point, she'd been writing a lot of stuff where her bitterness and anger at her mother was coming out. And she was really going back to her own trauma as a child. And she suffered a lot from her mother. when she wrote that piece, it was in the act of writing it that she suddenly understood why her mother was like that her mother had this illness, that they were the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like in the act of writing that, she forgave her mother.
Oh, beautiful. So she re-encountered her mother by remembering more fully the memories. Absolutely.
Yeah, and by claiming one of the good times.
Yeah. And Anna, what's so amazing to me is so many of us, we imagine we do this work with our therapists, we do this work in private places, but your writers, they're doing it with others. Many writers prefer to be in solitude, but talk about that, how someone makes that kind of discovery with others in the same room at the same time.
Well, that is kind of what I refer to as part of the magic. I mean, for one, the magic is that it seems no matter what prompt I come up with or whatever it is, that every week there's some absolutely astounding things that result, and also an incredible variety. But the other part of it is not just what gets written, it's what happens in the sharing. For instance, I remember the day that Angel wrote that and shared it. And it was kind of like not just an eye-opener for her in that moment, but even I can't remember who, but somebody made a comment too about, their own mother. And there's a lot of people, no, I shouldn't say a lot of people, but it's a consistent thread that shows up a lot, is people having a lot of anger towards their mothers in particular.
Anna, will you say a word just for the listener? The structure of the class, people write in class and then choose or choose not to share what they've written that day. How does it work?
Well, it's literally that. We write and then we share. And sometimes, for whatever reason, maybe somebody hasn't been able to write that day. That sometimes happens. Or maybe somebody doesn't want to share that day. But the majority always are sharing. And it's in that sharing that people actually get sort of like, they get this affirmation of their own humanity, hearing someone else's story. And it also, even though everybody's story is unique, there are themes that kind of like ripple through. And so it's like I'm not so alone. I'm not so alone when I'm in this group and I hear these stories. And that's part of it.
And would you describe how you see your role as a facilitator, teacher, nurturer? What is your job when these folks are gathered? What are you responsible for?
Well, one thing I have to do sort of right at the beginning, and it's harder since the pandemic, being on Zoom, but my thing is to do a sort of check-in with like the group energy overall, and then individual energy. Sometimes you pick up that somebody's really not having a good day, and is it, what's going on there? I mean, there's times when things might stop, or I might not do what I was planning on doing because someone's actually in some kind of a pretty immediate crisis or on the brink of. And so we'll sort of like bring that into the class so we can process it as a group. So it's this piece of always having to like, pay attention to mood and everything from sometimes when we'd be in the cafe and we'd have a full room and people coming in, and you could see someone was kind of like, their body language would tell you they're kind of like really antsy or angry, that kind of thing. And being able to make sure I'm aware of that and handling it appropriately, which a lot of times doesn't mean doing anything other than being aware of it and maybe going and putting an arm on their shoulder or something. And then it's like, I don't know. I bring in these prompts, I share them, chuck them out there. And I basically, it's like, whatever, however you want to respond, go with it, go with it, just go with it. And boom, they write.
So you're tending to the mood of the group, the mood of the individuals, how that individual mood might be affecting the group, and then you invite. I'm remembering once you told a story about a student who crumpled up their paper and threw it aside.
Yeah.
Would you tell that story again?
Yeah, actually, that was not at the Recovery Café. That's when I was teaching at El Centro de la Raza in Seattle, and I was working with kids and youth. And this was a high schooler in my young adult class. So I think she was 18. And she was somebody who was generally very shy and very gifted. And in fact, she's gone on to become quite a name out there in the visual arts world, but I won't say the name. And anyway, she wrote, and I have one rule, and this is my rule across the board, which is don't throw things away. You know, you can hate it or whatever, but don't throw it away, save it, because so often we're too close to something that we've just written, and we can either think it's wonderful, the best thing, you know, there is, and then we'll read it later and think, well, maybe not. Or it can be the other way. We think we've written a bunch of nonsense, and then we look at it again and see something, aha. So that's my rule. So anyway, on the way out of class, I see her ball up her paper and and she sees that I've seen, right as she shoots for a basket into the garbage can, you know, and so we both dive for the garbage can at the same time, and I managed to get it. And she's like, oh, keep it, you know, stomped out. So I get home, I have no idea what's on it. I look at it and it's like one of those absolutely perfect, word for word, perfect first drafts, a gem. So I typed it up. And next week I go back and hey, this is what you wanted to throw away. Take another look. So she read it and she goes, oh, you edited it. I said, no, I didn't. Here's the original. Take a look. It's exactly the way you wrote it. I said, this is just beautiful. And there was a citywide contest going on at the time called Language of Hope. And that was going to accompany these photographs, and it was all these different youth groups across the city and in the public schools. And the sort of winners were going to have their writing displayed in the Seattle Art Museum alongside the photographs. It was kind of a big deal. And I said, this, you know, I should send this in, do what you want, you know. Well, the next thing you know, not only is it accepted, but it's on the front page of the Sunday Seattle Times, you know, Sunday section.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and it just, and she now treasures it. And her, you know, her grandmother loves it. And it's a poem about her father who was deported when she was young. A memory of her father. And
powerful, powerful. I love that. That part of your role is to see hope and beauty where others do not, is part of your work. And to hold it for them until they can see.
Yeah, and it's so, I mean, and it's not just people who are new to writing. The same thing holds true for me or any writer. You know, you don't have the best judgment of your own work when it's just come out, because you've got an emotional involvement with it of one sort or another.
Yeah. So Anna, you have stories like that where right out of the gate, it's a beautiful piece. And you have stories where you have coached students to revisit, reinterpret, rewrite. Lots of experience as a teacher. What would you say you know now about the work or about yourself that you didn't know when you began as a writing teacher?
When I began as a writing teacher, period, or when I began this particular work with Safe Place?
I'm interested in both, but let's start with Safe Place, because you had a vision at the beginning for Safe Place.
Yes, I did. And at that point, that vision didn't include a published book, you know, but sort of like as time went on, the quality of the writing, people's dedication, and just how, and also this thing of what actually happened in the room with the sharing, the impact of hearing one another's work. You know, I started to think, well, this really needs to go to a higher level. You know, so this is something that was new for me, to think in those terms. Now, I've done books with students before, or been a part of a book project, but this was different because a lot of the books that get done with writing groups, like for instance, when I was in the prison, you know, they would have a magazine and stuff came out, but it would be the raw work just as it was written originally, which is nothing wrong with that, except that these writers, like any other writer, you know, we rarely come up with our best finished piece. We better rarely reach the point that this piece can go within, you know, 20 minutes or half an hour. It just doesn't happen. And so I wanted to actually I believed in the people enough, in their own ability and their enthusiasm, that, okay, let's learn about editing. Let's learn about bringing your work to a finished piece. And let's start to look at things. So like the story I just told you, that piece just came out, you know, for them to learn to start discerning which pieces needed work and which didn't. So all that was new. And then the process of actually doing the book involved, particularly with the 10 people, the 10 featured writers, that I met with people, sometimes individually or in twos, but a lot of very intensive work because I didn't want to just be the editor that came in and did it for them with corrections. I wanted for them to develop the skill where they could go in and make changes, and then we could discuss them, and, you know, I could maybe make another suggestion, but where they were actually gaining confidence in that way. And of course it was uneven, everything is, but they really got engaged with that. It was fantastic. And as a result, I think the writing in this book is of a different quality, you know.
Yeah. Can I say back what I think I heard you say, Anna? That what you discovered, and maybe surprised you, but what you discovered this project is that the healing writing, the telling of a story that transforms drama, that returns joy to a life, is in some ways an editing collaborative process. People can do it together. And
well, that's part of it, but it's also not everybody that comes to the cafe, or I mean, not comes to the cafe, but comes to Safe Place Writing Circle. People come for different reasons. Some people just want the experience in the classroom, and it gives them a kind of rush of adrenaline, and, you know, they get some things out, and that's what they want. They don't want to be a writer. They're not interested in developing in that way anymore. Just fine. But the thing is that there are also, why can the literary scene in this country not include people who maybe once slept in a doorway?
Absolutely.
You know, had a serious, well, actually, of course, the literary world has got plenty of people in its ranks who have problems with alcohol and addiction and stuff. But, you know, why can we not have this? I don't buy this thing about the gifted few, and that somehow the gifted few will happen to kind of wind up being in the middle class with some kind of means. No. And it's the many are gifted. There is so much talent. There is so much. And when it's one thing to discover your own story and explore it and understand yourself better and recall a good memory, but it's another layer when you start to realize that I can actually create something beautiful with words and language, I can learn how to shape it. I can become an artist. That's something else.
Yes, I love that. It's so beautiful the way that you put that. And I would even stretch further, having experienced how your students talk about your class, and that I have a story that's beautiful to tell, whether I'm a writer or share it with others, that everyone's gifted. Everyone has a story.
Mm-hmm.
That's important
Absolutely.
to be articulated. And that's what you create safe space for in your class.
Yeah, everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And everybody can articulate it, and there needs to be room for everybody to do that. And amongst those everybody's, there are some people who become like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I want to actually, it's like the person discovering, I want to be a doctor. I want to go to medical school. And some people discover, I want to be a writer.
Absolutely.
That's cool,
Anna, what message would you want to say to the reader of this anthology, or something, an invitation to the reader?
Well, I guess there's different types of readers, and when I was developing the book, the idea, and then the actual book itself, and I was thinking, oh, who do I want this book to reach out in the world? And I think there's different potential audiences. And one of them is people like the people that come to the cafe, but who haven't come, or different parts of the country where there is no cafe, whatever, where when they open these pages, they find themselves, or they feel like this is a community that I'm a part of. That can be a very validating thing. I want this to be something that breaks down the stereotypes that so many people hold about mental illness and about people who experience homelessness or whatever, Hear their stories, look at their faces.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I want people who are in the recovery community or in the mental health community or whatever to maybe find some value in the book in some way that might help in their work or with their clients.
And I have one more question that I've loved this conversation, and it's a book of poetry, a book of short essays, but they're also beautiful portraits, photographs of the artists. Would you say a word about why that seemed important? What made you include portraits?
Well, that kind of actually dovetails right with the thing I was just saying about breaking down stereotypes. Because I think so many people hold this image of a person in a certain amount of unkempt appearance, out of control behavior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I want them to see the faces of these people and see the intelligence, the joy, the humanity in their faces, and see the diversity that's there in terms of race and ethnicity, in terms of age. And I mean, even though you can't necessarily tell just from looking at one photograph, but for instance, the last photograph in the book, it is our class elder, Mary Jo, who's in her 80s. And Mary Jo is a lesbian, which she writes about in here. And it's also this thing of like, people carry all these different gender stereotypes too.
Yeah.
And so I just want, but the most important thing is that through all of them, there's a certain dignity and humanity that just shines. And that's what we need to recognize as a society.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to close our time, Anna. I hope everyone will have the privilege of reading these words and seeing these photos.
Well, thank you, Ruby.
You're so welcome. What a privilege.
This has been an incredible talk. I think that it's an amazing book. The photos to me are some of the most impressive, humane photos I've seen in a book in a long time.
Yeah.
And I wanted to end this by thanking Anna and thanking Ruby. And also I want to thank all our sponsors this year: For Culture of King County, City of Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture, the Washington State Arts Commission with help from NEA, which pays for our projects. They've all been wonderful. And I thank you very much for being here and hope to get a much larger audience for this wonderful anthology, Words from the Café.
Thank you, Phoebe.
Thank you, Phoebe.
Talk to you later.